Hello everyone, welcome to Policy Engine training session for August 2025. My name is Wahid. Today we have planned to show you a short demo on baseline estimation, and then I will show you a code review for reviewing household simulation and how we can implement a Python code for simulating policy scenario using Policy Engine. And also we will deep dive to labor supply dynamics and how we can implement and get result with the code with that. And at the end, we have time for Q&A. So, um, okay, for Policy Engine, actually, we have the comprehensive documentation on all of the features that we have for the code and also about the methodology that we are using. Uh, Today, I'm showing a kind of demo on how we can use the code of Policy Engine and the way that you can generate analysis on household side and also uh, micro simulation from the macro level and how we can get the budgetary impact and distribution on analysis. In the last training session, we had an overview on the code side, but for the household implementation, today I'm going to present the first have a review on the household again from the PolicyEngine UK, and then I will go through the uh, budgetary impact, distributional impact, and see how we can implement for the macro level. And then we can deep dive into how we can implement uh, labor supply responses and yeah, how we can implement the elasticities. Okay. Um, First, just simply, I want to show you the way that we can use Policy Engine code. So, from a starting point is that you need to import microsimulation from Policy Engine UK, and then you need to pass the data set. So, the data set that we are using is FRS, and we have some calibration on FRS and also improvement to get the enhanced FRS. So you can pass that and then by the command sim.calculate data frame, you can actually specify which parameter you are using and you want to calculate and work on. The first variable is household level, and then if you assign the first parameter to household level, the data frame will project everything to household. Same for people, and yeah, you can just, for example, assign it to person underline ID and will be projected to person level. For this example, we want to have the income tax for each region for period 2025. Then when we have the data frame here uh, from the data set that we have, then we can group by the region and get the sum of income tax and then sort. Then you can uh, see the values for each region, uh, the income tax for each region. Um, okay, this is just a short and overview of how we can use that. Let's get started with implementing how we can deep dive in micro simulation, how we can get different reforms and analysis based on them. So for the full micro simulation model, you need just this snippet. So we need a Hugging Face token. By this command, you can get that, and then you need to install Policy Engine UK. Uh, when you have the token, you can just pass that. You need to sign in for Hugging Face and just pass your token to your environment like VS Code if you're using with that. Um, just start with a simple example for the uh, household simulation. So all of the codes and implementation that we are reviewing right now, you can find it the web app version. So using policyengine.org, you can go and have all of these stuff in a web app, and by clicking and selecting different variables and scenario, you can replicate all of this code. And there is a command, there is an option for actually download all of the codes from the web app and using that to replicate your analysis in Python package. But for now, for this training session, I want to stick to the code and show you how we can use that. So for the first household simulation, first we need to import the simulation and get the kind of situation. What is the situation? Is basically uh, specify and define the group of people that you want to make the simulation for them. So here we need to have a first list of people, then person. For the person, we can assign the age in each year for them, and then employment income. Uh, and we want to have all of the members in this unit. So how we can get these kind of hierarchy of variable. So it's good to have a kind of a quick look to the previous training session. I explained all of these variables and how you can set the parameters here. So after defining the situation, then you need to pass the situation to the simulation command for policy engine, and then you can calculate by the command simulation.calculate. For example, if you want to see the income tax for this sample household, you can just by doing that you can calculate this and then print. Um, okay. Now we want to see if you have a policy in mind. For example, we want to have a reform uh, changing one particular parameter in tax and benefit system in the UK, and we want to see how that affects our sample household as we define the household here. So by defining the policy reform, uh, for example, we want to have a income tax rate from 20% to 25%. This is the reform that we want to see its effect. We need a baseline for that. So we will pass the situation to simulation command, simulation option, sorry. And then we need a reform. So we will pass the reform to that. We build the reform here. And then pass the situation as well. And then we can calculate the baseline income tax and reform income tax. And then we can see the differences here. Um, yeah, this is how you can actually create a Hugging Face account, how you can export the token here. If you want to see the population analysis, you can just simply use the micro simulation. So you can say that, okay, import micro simulation from PolicyEngine UK, then you'll pass the data set to that, and then uh, you can actually have all of get the sum of universal credit, for example, for all of the population in our data set. Um, for estimating revenue from reforms, as we define the data set here, so we have different version of data sets. Uh, we have the documentation on how we are building the PolicyEngine UK data, but for now we want to use this from Hugging Face, and then because we want to have the estimation of revenue from the reforms, we need a kind of baseline first for the micro simulation, and then have a reform as well. So again, same structure, just passing the data set and then passing the reform, get the baseline dot calculate and reform dot calculate for calculating net income, and then you can get the change in revenue. Okay. Um, the next step is just you can just easily build up a kind of more complex households. So for example, you can set two parents here, two childs here, and then you can define the uh, unit. Unit is the family for us here, and then you can set that for example, for this household, the housing cost is uh, 9,600 for 2025. So basically, you can pass different variables at different level of hierarchy, and as I said, to see how we can just easily define uh, different level of units and how these parameter are connected with these levels. Just review the last training session, please. Um, okay, for this household example, uh, we want to calculate tax and benefits. Okay, we will pass the family situation as we defined here to the simulation, and then we can calculate the, for example, child benefits, the universal credit, and income tax. Uh, okay, we can now go to running simulations. We want to build our first simulation here. As we discussed, again, we want to calculate a kind of starting with a simulation here, passing the situation as we're defining the group of people here, and then calculating tax income. Um, for understanding the situation structure, uh, the situation is a dictionary has three main sections: people, benefit units, and household. By the people, you can just assign some values in each year to these parameter, which are related to, for example, the people in this group, and then you can pass these members to benefit units and then household. Um, then we want to see how we can calculate different variables. So PolicyEngine UK can calculate many couple of variables here. For example, uh, for generating the income tax and national insurance and council tax, you can see how we can implement. And then for the benefits, I put some example here. For the summary of measures, for example, you can see that the simulation that calculate if you pass the in poverty, you can see whether based on our calculation uh, this this household is actually in poverty or not. Um, okay, next step is that now we define the situation and baseline. Now we want to simulate a policy scenario. The policy here is for testing policy changes. We just create a scenario and apply it in the simulation. For this example, we want to see when we increase universal credit standard allowance for single people over 25 years old uh, from the current rate to uh, £500 per month. So we need to define first the scenario. By scenario, we can have multiple parameter changes here, but we have only one in this example. Um, for applying this policy reform, we need to pass this scenario and situation and get the reform underlying sim variable. Um, then we can calculate the universal credit in the baseline assumption and then reform assumption. Um, yeah, here I put some example. We put some example here for working with families and children. We can see that again, how we can assign different values for different parameters here based on the child and parent, the people in the group, and also from the household level, how we can assign, for example, housing cost or childcare cost. These variables, for example, if you want to see the impact of a reform on childcare subsidies, then you need to assign some variables for childcare costs. Um, Yeah, in this example again, we can pass this situation into a simulation and then calculate the, for example, universal credit childcare. Um, Going through the using different data sources from Pandas data frame. So actually, we can actually have the data in the data frame. For example, the person ID for 2025, ages in 2025, employment income, and a state pension. Then you can pass these variables from the data frame to the simulation. And then you can calculate again, for example, income tax as well. So this is another way to how we can deal with the situations and how we can pass the not the situation, how we can pass the data set here. Um, so for the by default we are using our data sets, but you can actually pass other data sets to that as well. Uh, and yep, as I said, we are using FRS, but we have some enhancement and advancement to that data set. So by default, we are using this data set. Um, Going through micro simulation now, we want to have a macro level analysis on the changes in tax and benefit system in the UK. So by starting importing micro simulation from PolicyEngine UK, you can pass a baseline here and actually define a scenario. So the scenario is that increasing the income tax rate to 25%, then you can define the reform here by calculating household net income for each household group in the baseline scenario and reform scenario and then you can get the sum of that and get the revenue changes. And these changes are the additional government revenue. So we are assuming a static format here, and we assume all of these kind of changes will go through the government revenue. As I said, you can again uh, kind of calculate the in poverty parameter here as well to see the changes of the poverty from the baseline to reform, which is increasing to 25% for the income tax rate, sorry. So after that, I want to explain the advanced techniques here. Uh, for example, uh, you can see how you can cache once you calculate them. I mean, when you just put a calculation here, uh, these code will actually variable and parameter are cached once you calculate it. Then if you want to insert a new values, you can just set input with arrays. So you can just create a arrays with new values, and then you can use the set that input, and this will invalidate related caches. Um, yeah, by assigning these parameter cached for 2025 to sim.taxbenefitsystem.parameter, you can cache them and use these variables as well. And if you want a reform that changes parameter after requesting them, you can just again build a scenario and use that cached values. So if you are using PolicyEngine a lot, maybe these kind of features may help you. Otherwise, you can just simply use the standard format. Um, Here is the option for how you can calculate multiple variable efficiently. So if you have multiple variable, you can define the variables and then pass it to that. For example, you will define a list of variable, employment income, income tax, universal credit, and so on. And then you can pass these variables into the calculate underlying data frame. By calculate underlying data frame, as we discussed last time, you can calculate multiple variables once with just a couple of lines in code. You can also work with different time periods, so you can pass years into that. So you can just have a list of years here, and then also have a kind of list with the bracket for the income by year, and then pass the years here. Um, I want to explain how next is just mapping variable to different entities. Some variable can be calculated at different level. For example, you can have employment income at person level or household level. Um, so the person level income is just sim.calculate employment income. So by default, it will map to person level. But if you change the command here, map to household, you can get the household income at the household level. And also you can get in the benefit level, benefit unit level. Um, so for the data set that we actually use that for the micro simulation, we are calibrating our surveys, the FRS surveys, I mean, uh, by calibrating the weights of each household, the share of the importance of the household in the aggregate level to reach all of the targets that we have. We have thousands of targets that we want to reach to them and tied to them. Uh, but you can, so in the data set, we have weights for each household, for each person. But you can modify the weights. Maybe you want to change the weights for a specific person or groups to see what happen if they are more important in the whole society, for example. Um, Also with that, you can uh, pass the use weights as false. So in this setup, you're not using the default weights, and then you can calculate the weight total by unweighted values here because you turned off the use weights, and then um, you can get the multiply that with modified weights that we have here. The example here is the weights times 1.5 and then get the sum of that. But by default, it automatically, if you don't want to turn it off, the use weights here, I mean, by default, we will, this code will calculate the weights that we are using. So in the documentation, we put consider a part for debugging simulation. So this is how you can, by printing out some of these variables, you can actually see how you can different components, check the individual components and understand the tax calculation. Getting the sum and having some sense checking on different values. Uh, In this part, we want to compare simulation, analyze dependencies. So, for the dependencies, for example, you can calculate and see which variables are connected to income taxes. So, if you run the sim.get variable dependencies for any variable that you want, for example, income tax, you will get a list of variables that are connected in calculating the income tax. Um, or maybe you want to see the dependencies by the depth. We only use here in this example, we put the depth to 3 layer. So in the hierarchy of calculating the variable, we have different components at different layers. Um, in this command, in this feature, you can actually define the depth. If you put 3, for example, you will see only the depth to 3 and you will not see the depth after that. Um, okay, maybe you want to compare the baseline and reform situation. By the compare, you can get for example, for the uh, baseline and reform, you will define the micro simulation and apply your reform here, and then you can get the comparison df data frame, and you will pass the baseline dot compare. We will by this command you can compare the baseline and the reform. For example, you want to see by depth of one the income tax, so you can see the structure of that. Um, the next step is getting an overview about creating policy scenario. Uh, as we discussed, you can create multiple scenarios and test your population or test your household in different scenarios. So by scenario, you are flexible to have a kind of one micro simulation and passing different scenarios to that, and you can build up different scenarios and compare them and getting scenarios on top of each other. Um, Again, you need a scenario and situation by defining the people in that, and then you can get the simulation by passing the scenario and situation and calculate, for example, income tax. Um, in the documentation and also on the GitHub for PolicyEngine UK, you can check how you can path uh, how you can pass the different path of the uh, parameter here and variables. For example, gov.hmrc.income tax rate UK, the bracket 0 rate is the basic rate. If you have doubt about uh, the path of the variable, you can use the web app and uh, get a search for the variables, having your simulation, and after you actually analyze, there is an option to download the code and use that code to double check the path that you are using here. But on the GitHub, you can just easily check that and get the right path to the variables. Um, One of the important um, feature that we have is just you can create a comprehensive reform package. So, for example, you can just create a welfare reform, having some scenarios and changes here. This is just an example of increasing universal credit standard allowance. And also you can pass other variable changes, for example, reduce UC tapper rates, defining a family situation, get the reform, universal credit, or income tax or household net income over different different variables for reform that underlines thing. So basically, you can calculate these variables for the reform. Here uh, you can define. So basically, in this reform only, we have the parameter changes, the value changes in the parameter. Um, if you have different scenarios, you can just combine scenarios together. So for an example, consider you have a scenario for the tax changes, income tax personal and rates. You want to change it from 12,000, I guess, to 15,000, and also the rates. And then you want to also have a benefit scenario and changing some parameter in the benefits. Or you want to actually define also a childcare scenario and changing, for example, universal credit element of childcare max appropriation to 90%. This is how we can combine different scenarios together, and this gives us the flexibility to actually calculate multiple scenarios, just a couple of lines, and get the result of that. You can pass the name and scenario to the list in that and get in a for loop to calculate the simulation for each scenario. The next part, which is really helpful and useful if you are using Policy Engine for building your own custom scenario. So until now, we only discussed about how you can change the parameters, the value of parameters. But if you want to define a structured scenario, for example, creating a two-child limit repeal scenario, you can actually do that. And this is how you can, for example, if we already have that variable in our rules engine, you can just set that to, for example, repeal that to infinity, and then by that you can calculate for for an example large family here. As before, you can pass that scenario to the reform and also calculate the baseline and get the differences. And maybe you want to build a benefits camp reindexing scenario, which is completely structural, and you need to define a new variable, a new methodology to calculate that. For that, there is no need to actually go to PolicyEngine UK core changes, and you can only by creating a function like this one, you can actually build a structural reform. I will show you how you can pass this reform to that, but it could be helpful if you have a look on the documentation of PolicyEngine UK and also see some example of functions in our GitHub. You can use also ChatGPT and Cloud to use that and get the overview of PolicyEngine UK. And after that, uh, you're familiar with how we are using the variables, variable path, and how we are getting the simulation and parameter here. So, for defining just completely a structural reform, for example, we just reset the parameter first and get the parameter again. And for using a for loop, we are removing any values after 2025 for these parameters, and we actually set new variables to that. Then we are operating and get the process underlying parameters here. So this is the same process as we are doing at PolicyEngine if you want to add a kind of new tax and benefits components. So you don't need to for example, clone everything from the GitHub of PolicyEngine UK, and just simply by defining a function, you can have a structural change. So if you want to use them, you need to have a situation as well. And then you can pass this situation for the benefits cap family. And then for the scenario, for the reform, is reindexing benefit cap as you defined here. Then by printing them, you can calculate the differences. So for the advanced scenario techniques, you can have different time parameters here. For example, you can have reform on a particular parameter and have a different value for that in different years. This is how you can deal with different values and time varying parameters. Also, as we discussed, you can create complex scenario with simulation modifier. Again, you can just calculate the for example, you can define a phase out PIP gradually by starting at 2025 to end date 2029, and by that you can have your custom reform and function, and then you can pass it to simulation. This is how we can use that. So again, a recommendation here is that just get into PolicyEngine documentation and code on GitHub, PolicyEngine UK, and then you can see some samples. They will help you to go through how we can define different structural reform and custom reforms. Uh, we put some example. So this is the documentation that you can find on the GitHub and the website. Uh, Here we put an example for universal credit scenario with dynamic changes. So again, we modify universal credit for new claimants. For different years, we have different values, and then completely same structure. You need a function for reform, and then you need to pass to uh, micro simulation as you have the kind of uh, situation here. So you need situation, you need scenario, and then use the simulation. Um, okay, here we are using simulation modifier as well. What it's doing is that you can modify your simulation because this is actually let me just go through that. Where is that my modify the universal? Yeah, for the new claimant. Okay. Um, by creating the UC rebalancing scenario, you can pass that, and this scenario needs to rebalance parameter to be active. So some scenarios, as I said, needs to make changes that depends on the simulation's own data. So you want to step by step have a simulation, use those data, and by using those data, create your own reform. Okay, this is how we can build that. Uh, you can have these uh, scenarios analysis at population level as well. So for that, you need to use micro simulation, not simulation, and then calculating them, getting the sum, and see the, for example, cost of tax cost plus universal credit cost. Uh, so this is in this part, you can see how you can test scenarios step by step. Uh, you can actually define them and printing out the result and compare them. Uh, Last part is labor supply dynamics. So we actually uh, by defining uh, income elasticity and substitutional elasticity, we are calculating labor supply dynamics. We have also a research article on that and how we define that, the related methodology that we are using, and also related literature that we cited them and used them. So for the basic dynamics calculation, um, we actually use some default elasticities. By applying them to the labor supply, we are calculating behavior responses. So how you can do that? Uh, for just I want to mention that for the behavior responses, we have uh, multiple training session. Previously, you can just watch them and having a kind of overview of uh, the definition and what is it about and how we can get them. But for now, I just want to stick to the code. Um, Again, for the basic dynamic calculation, we want to apply the dynamic to any micro simulation and the possibility of doing that and create baseline and reform simulation. Um, Again, we need to define a baseline scenario, reform scenario, passing them to micro simulation. So the baseline here is that the national insurance class one is 12%, the reform is 10%, so we want to decrease that. If we want to uh, calculate the changes uh, with assuming by turning on the dynamics and behavior responses in Policy Engine, you need to actually set up a baseline link and apply dynamics. So you can get the reform.baseline.apply parameter changes as we defined here, and turn on the dynamics. So the dynamics is reform.apply dynamics in which year, 2025. Then we can calculate the, for example, substitution effect and income response, and also participation response in terms of labor supply responses. Um, Here, this is another example of working with dynamics. The participation, you can calculate that. The progression, you can calculate the access progression responses, intensive margin, extensive margin. This is how you can use that and calculate different values. For the distributional analysis, you can, for example, for different ages with these beans, we can actually calculate the household income. Yeah, we can calculate the different responses for different ages. Uh, and assign them to actually map them to household income decile, and then get the result for the distribution over the income deciles. For understanding the elasticity framework, we are using uh, some values as a default for income elasticity and substitution elasticity, but you can find them and actually change them. Um Yeah, you can print the elasticity distribution by getting the progression into that, and if the progression, for example, here is which group has different elasticities. If they are is parent, you can define them and have a kind of define heterogeneous elasticities for different groups. Also, you can validate against OBR estimation. Uh, you can use PolicyEngine to build a reform for different scenarios, and also considering different values for elasticities, and compare them to OBR estimation. Yeah, this documentation, PolicyEngine UK documentation, has also different parts as well for the validation, and also for the policy and how we are the model baseline, what is the universal credit rebalancing reform. Um, but I want to stop in that point. For the next month, we have planned to talk about public services, and also talk about firm VAT microsimulation that we are adding to our model as well. And yeah, thanks for consideration and for your time. If you have any question, feel free to ask.